Hello and welcome to the Economic Times Budget FY24 Rising Bharat Summit, part of the ET India Budget Conversation series with industry experts, thought leaders, and policymakers for the most comprehensive deliberations on what to expect from the Union budget. I'm Multani. Now, world over, there is a rise in food and fuel prices. There are fears of a recession for many economies and possibly a surge in COVID. In the backdrop of the tough global environment, India has its own challenges. Numbers show that growth is down, manufacturing is wobbly, we need jobs, and the rural economy needs a big boost. We also need an uptick in consumption. Add to this the continued focus on better infrastructure, public health and education, climate action, sectoral reforms, and good governance. All so that the economy in general and Bharat, India's rural economy in particular, can rise. Now, how will all of these issues, or which of these issues, will be tackled in this big budget before the general election? Well, our reporters speak to experts, the entrepreneurs, the policy gurus, to give you the macroeconomic perspectives to insights on jobs, the focus on sectors like health, education, climate action, opinions from industry leaders, manufacturers, MSMEs, startups, those in supply chain, experts in banking and fintech. Now, you will find it all here at the Economic Times Budget FY24 Rising Bharat Summit. Stay with us.
On the 1st of February 2023, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman will present her fifth budget and the last full budget before the general elections in 2024. She recently indicated that the forthcoming budget will continue to push growth on the back of public spending, saying it will follow the spirit of earlier budgets. India's growth has slowed as global economies have slowed down and interest rates have risen worldwide to control the spiraling inflation. In this backdrop, the IMF, the World Bank, and India's own Reserve Bank have slashed the growth forecast for India. How do we get back on an elevated 8 to 9% growth path, manage inflation while being fiscally prudent, create jobs, ensure the building and maintenance of critical infrastructure like roads, transport, power, sanitation, and also a push in the social sector? Now, I'm very pleased to welcome Mr. Subhash Chandra Garg, former Economic Affairs and Finance Secretary, Government of India, and the author of the book, The $10 Trillion Dream. Mr. Garg, thank you very much for being here. It's good to have you here.
Thank you, Multani. Thank you very much.
All right, so the budget is often a balancing act. How easy or difficult do you think it will be for the finance minister? And what's the roadmap broadly that India will need to embrace to emerge as this resilient economy in this backdrop of the gloomy global outlook?
So thank you. The budget making for a country like India is always challenging and more challenging in times like this. And therefore, budget is not a non-serious kind of event. The budget of India or Government of India also influences the course of economy as well as redistribution of incomes in the society very much. And therefore, to my mind, the budget is a very, very important event and occasion for taking stock of where we are going, where the economy is going, where the government is going, what the government has done, how is it performed well. So what I'll do is that I would take for you a small stock of the current budget's implementation, that's 22-23 budget, and how we are doing, especially in view of the fact that during the year there was a large conflict globally between Russia and Ukraine, which impacted lots of prices, also inflation and growth concerns globally. And we, as you mentioned, are currently in a situation where there is a global slowdown of the growth. So you would recall that 22-23 budget, the government sort of planned to make a total expenditure of about 39 lakh crores. It had revenues of about 23 odd lakh crores, and there was a fiscal deficit of about over 16 lakh crores. So these were the broad numbers. The government's revenues primarily comes from the tech side. There is a small non-tax component, only about 2.6 lakh crores or something. The disinvestment target were kept modest. You would remember there was about 65,000 crores. The rest of the revenues of 23 odd lakh crores, by and large, were from the taxes, which is about 19 odd lakh crores. The government's tax revenues have performed much better than what the budget envisaged. Direct taxes have done quite well, especially both corporate taxes and the personal income taxes are higher. My sense is that the government would end up receiving about 15% more, 15 to 16% more than what they budgeted. So as you would remember, the budget was about 14.4 lakh crores of the direct tax revenues. That would mean that the government may get about 2 to 2.25 lakh crores extra in terms of the direct tax revenues during the year. The disinvestment has not performed well, despite the modest target. There might be a shortfall of about 25 to 30,000 crores in the disinvestment. On indirect taxes, the GST has done well. There should be a growth of about 10 to 12% over the budgeted number, which might give about 85,000 to 90,000 crores extra. There would be some shortfall on the excise duties, but putting all and all together, there might be an increase of about 2.5 to 3 lakh crores on the revenue side. That's fairly substantial over a budget of 23-24 lakh crores. But the government's expenditures have also grown massively over what they budgeted, especially on the fertilizer subsidies front. The gas prices, which are basically the input for the urea, and we are making a lot of urea in the country. So the fertilizer subsidies might end up requiring another 1.2 to 1.3 lakh crores over what was budgeted. Likewise, the government, though it did not say in the budget, decided to extend the Prime Minister's Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana for the entire year, which would cost about 1 lakh crores extra. There is some additional expenditures on the petroleum subsidies and some other items. There might be some savings from the disbursement to the states for the centrally sponsored schemes, as the government might sort of claw back some of the earlier extra resources provided to the states which they had not spent. So all in all, my sense is that there might also be expenditure increase of about the same amount as the revenues increase, which will allow the government to keep the fiscal deficit at the level at which it had budgeted at that time. The government's fiscal deficit was 6.4% of the GDP estimated at that time, of about 260 lakh crores. The GDP has performed better than what the government had estimated in terms of nominal growth of only about 11%. My sense is it should be about 15% in nominal terms, the GDP growth, which may make the government's GDP estimate go up from 260 lakh crores to about 260 lakh crores, giving little more space to the government if it wants to keep the fiscal deficit at the 6.4% level, so it might get you about 35,000 crores of extra resources to spend. But my sense is that the government may not opt for increasing the fiscal deficit from 16.6 odd lakh crores, which was budgeted at that time. And therefore, there might be, in terms of GDP, a little more consolidation. Instead of 6.4, you might end up at 6.2 or 6.25%. So that's the year as it goes. Now, if you look at where we are at this moment, in the context of what is required next year. So the governments always have three basic responsibilities to discharge while budget for when they make budget. One is that the government provides numerous kinds of public goods and services. So you have to take care of defense, security, policing, environment, macroeconomic stability, etc. So that is the first major judicial management governance of the sovereign, and so that's the principal responsibility of the government, and it is paid for or funded from the taxes which the government collect. In fact, the basis for tax collection is largely to pay for the public goods and services. The second responsibility which the government has is to bring about a kind of redistribution in the economy, to take care of the poor, vulnerable, and the backward people in terms of both area and the persons. Government has a very large program for taking care of this responsibility. You have numerous kind of subsidies. I spoke about food subsidy, the fertilizer subsidies, petroleum subsidies, etc. You also have a lot of merit goods related responsibilities like spending on the health, education, nutrition, health insurance, and so forth. The government also has undertaken numerous programs to provide the basic services to the people who deserve to get it. For example, constructing houses for the houseless, providing water connections, tapped water connections for water supply, electricity, toilets, and so on. So these all cost money. So the second set of responsibilities which the government has to provide for is the redistribution obligations. And the third one, which you initially focused in your opening question, is that the nation can only prosper if it grows, and you can take care of poor men's responsibility as well if you have larger resources. The larger resources come if your GDP grows, your national income grows, and you have better taxes. That's how the growth is a central concern of the government. So I put it that these are the three big buckets when the governments sort of plan their budgets. The public goods and services have to be paid for, the redistribution agenda, and the growth agenda. Now, I think from the public goods and services responsibility, the government should make a pivot from very large public sector programs it runs in roads, rails. These are important, which we should be doing, but many of these things can be done very efficiently in the private sector. But the ones which only the governments can do is taking care of the environment, cleanliness, sort of improving the health and wholesomeness of the rivers, lakes, and others. We unfortunately don't spend very much on the environmental agenda. This is bizarre, this is surprising, but it's a fact that the government does not spend much. You see the Delhi getting engulfed by the AQI turning into severe and unlivable kind of category, but still the government is not spending enough to take care of the environmental concerns which arise out of it. Our rivers are completely dead. Yamuna in Delhi or elsewhere Ganga is no longer the life-giving kind of water. So I think time has come for the government to spend much more on both the carbon emissions control, but more than that, the pollution related environmental spending that need to be scaled up. On the redistribution side, my sense is that the government should not be actually spending money on increasing the food security allowance by doubling it. You can't eat more than 5 kg per person as cereals. Doubling it is only a waste, and the government use this as a tool to justify and pay for the food corporation subsidies, which in any case had to be paid even if you don't distribute. But now with the food stocks in FCI coming down quite a lot, the market price for both rice as well as wheat going up substantially much more than the minimum support price. I think it's time for government to sort of get out of this PMGKAY and reduce the expenditure on that. I don't see the government escaping the fertilizer subsidies. Fertilizer, basically the urea is what would cost you much more, and the realignment of the global gas supplies after this Russian stoppage of the gas supplies to Europe, etc., will keep the natural gas supplies very high, and therefore I think the government will have to provide for similar kind of subsidies, fertilizer subsidies for the next year in the range of about 2.4 to 2.5 lakh crores. The government need not provide any subsidies for petroleum products or something. So I think there is a vast agenda on reforming the subsidies and redistribution. But on growth, let me now come for a little bit of time on what the government should be doing on the growth. See, the government's capital expenditure agenda has been ambitious. It has grown substantially, but it's largely going into 3 or 4 main items. Railway infrastructure expenditure has gone up. Highways expenditure has gone up. The defense expenditure has gone up. These are all very important items, but these are not the items which will build India's future growth agenda. And these can increasingly be done more in the private sector, as I said earlier. The future growth agenda is primarily on the digital side. The way we can sort of make our economy hugely digitalized will decide whether there would be a growth in the manufacturing and the industrial side or not. Likewise, how do we take care of the energy transition and the other environmental concerns, the circular economy, the sequestering of the carbon, the energy transition from the fossil fuels to the solar, wind, and the hydrogen-based energy. I think that will decide whether India grows very fast in times to come or not. We have a lot of policy problems on this front, as well as our expenditure on these are very, very small, relatively speaking, in comparison to what we spend on the railroad and other transportation and communication infrastructure. We waste a lot of money in keeping entities like BSNL, etc., alive and wasting so much money. So I think if we can reorganize our capital expenditure away from the traditional transportation and communication agenda towards the environmental infrastructure and the digital infrastructure agenda, and also follow policies which are of consequence to that, I think that would make India relatively a much more growth inviting country or inducing country than otherwise. Let me conclude now where we are. So these are tough agenda. This requires a lot of resources. Government is a resource constraint of about 39 odd lakh crores. About 15 odd lakh crores goes into items like interest, pensions, mandatory transfers to the states and all, over which the government has no control. It has control over the expenditure of only about 24 lakh crores. These constraints would continue to become more adverse in next year. I don't think tax growth would be as good next year, with both GST and other direct corporate taxes slowing down. But the expenditure commitments, if you realign like this, interest commitments would go up very sharply. So I think if the government makes a budget which shifts these kind of expenditures, but keeps the fiscal consolidation path in sight, and bring down the fiscal deficit for the next year to something like 6% or less, it's still very high, but I think that would be moving towards a more sensible and fiscally responsible path. Thank you very much.
And I'm very happy to have with me a panel of guests join me today to deliberate on the big budget before the general election and what India wants. I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Pradeep Multani, immediate former president, PhD CCI, and chairman of Multani Pharmaceuticals Limited. We have with us Mr. Gurcharan, author and economist and former CEO of Procter & Gamble India. Sir, it's great to have you here today. And we have with us Kavita Chacko, chief economist, Nuvama Wealth Management. Kavita, good to have you here with us today. All right, retail inflation has eased very slightly for us where we are at this point. Factory output has contracted. Our unemployment numbers are very high, and GDP numbers look under stress. The global outlook when it comes to the world economy is quite gloomy. COVID cases are also rising, especially in countries like the US, China, Japan. But in India, we have the next general election in 2024. Now, in this background, where we have the global macroeconomic headwinds, the gloomy outlook on growth, the RBI lowering its outlook on economic growth and also raising flags for inflation, what, according to you, will be the main trends and themes of budget 2023, given that it's also the last full budget before the general elections? So if you could begin, Kavita.
Okay, thanks, Melanie. So I think it would be sustainable growth and employment generation, which is likely to be the theme. And to enable this, there would be continued focus on capital expenditure or infrastructure building, and also a push towards manufacturing. All this while pursuing fiscal consolidation. And to add, there could be also spending on social sector schemes like health and education, which I foresee.
Mr. Das, what do you think will be the big trends that we'll see in the budget?
Well, I mean, given the scenario you've painted of global headwinds, and there is a crisis. I mean, Europe is already in recession, and America could well go into recession. And the temptation under these sort of crisis conditions is to go for a stimulus, and I think that would be a mistake, because our fiscal deficit is already too high. It's 6.4%. I think we should hold on to that deficit. Frankly, the combined deficit of states and of the center is 10%. Now, that would be considered a bit of a disaster in most economies. But we've been able to weather it because of growth and the fundamentals of our economy. After all, for the last 30 years, India has grown 7%. I mean, amazing for a democracy. So I would just say that hold on to the fiscal deficit already are the interest payments caused by the fiscal deficit of the government represent 30% of government revenues. That's much too high. So I would say let's keep focus on, as Kavita said, let's keep the focus on making India competitive. We have good news that the balance sheets of the companies are better now. There's a higher capacity utilization. So chances of investment now increasing because private investment is crucial. We have the equity markets are buoyant. And I think all these then will have a natural tendency to propel us.
Dr. Pradeep Multani, what is your take?
You see, the inflation trends in India shows significant deceleration as WPI shows sharp fall from its peak of around 16.6% in May 2022 to around 5.89% in November 2022. Whereas CPI, after continuously remaining at around 7% or slightly more since March 2022, has also come down to 5.9% in November 2022. It is expected that this deceleration would further continue. In light of these positive developments, the focus in the budget must be on maintaining growth momentum along with price stability. In addition, there should be rationalization of taxes in the sense that middle-income people should not be overburdened and must have sufficient disposable income to spur consumption expenditures in the economy. Direct benefit transfer schemes like Manrega should also get sufficient attention in the upcoming budget as it provides employment to around 28% of rural India households. 53% of workers employed are women. Despite its significant contribution to rural employment, the allocation fell for the same by 34% in last budget. It is being strongly pressed that this scheme must get adequate financial allocation in the upcoming budget by the government, which would contribute to rural employment and, most importantly, for women empowerment in the economy.
But let's not forget that, while the government may want to be fiscally prudent, there are state assembly elections also in Karnataka, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan in 2023, which also means that it is a tightrope walk. Mr. Gurcharan, would you say, which would likely discourage the government from making deep cuts to social welfare?
Well, I mean, freebies is what gives Indian democracy a bad name. It's just, it's so sad. The candidate who offers a freebie will always win over a reformer who will say, I'll encourage investment, create jobs, etc., etc. People say, oh, but then you'll be gone by the time it's over. So I think I'm glad that Prime Minister Modi started a debate this year and that we should carry on and educate consumers that really freebies are like band-aids, short-term. There's nothing, the best way out of poverty is sustainable jobs.
Kavita, you though pointed out that, you are expecting some sort of social spending, a deeper net perhaps when it comes to social spending. And you think that will be carried forward in the budget, which is to come?
Yes, so you have your welfare schemes, especially the ones targeted for the rural economy, mainly the Manrega scheme and also the PM Kisan scheme. So these schemes, at least the allocation should be maintained, I would say, at last year's level or FY23 levels. It shouldn't be cut down because to an extent it can help to counter the slowdown which we are experiencing and going to experience. So, and also Manrega scheme has been the mainstay of the rural economy since the pandemic. Okay, and even though in the last budget the allocation for that was reduced, in your supplementary budget you saw that nearly 45,000 crores of demands have been raised for that. So that shows the importance of this scheme, for the rural economy. And to my mind, that is something which will have to be maintained. I wouldn't call it a freebie or you'll say a stimulus also for that. that matter. This is something which they have been expenditure which they have been incurring, and they should be continuing with this.
Mr. Das, you said last year, and I was listening to a conversation that you had, on a channel, that last year's budget was a job-creating budget. It was a high-growth budget. India is expected to grow faster than many other economies, but do you see it growing fast enough so that it can boost jobs and trigger higher consumption?
Really, it is. If there was one priority for our country, and it is jobs. I just talked about the fact that our growth rate, enviable in a democracy, a 7% growth rate average over 30 years. That's pretty impressive. I mean, there have been ups and downs in this, but on an average, that's quite amazing. But the reality is that our model of growth has not created the jobs that we had always hoped for. Now, there could be many reasons. One, of course, is the fact that we have still not created a manufacturing revolution in the country, which is how every country in the world did it, including the latest being China, but certainly all the Asian tigers and the Western economies. The second is export pessimism. Exports, no country actually has been able to become a prosperous economy, move into a transition into becoming a middle-class society without exports. Even the biggest domestic economies have done it through exports. So exports will create the kind of jobs that we want. And, it's $22-25 trillion trade every year in goods. And we have less than 2%. So just imagine if you could just raise it to 3%, it'll create a revolution in jobs. The good news is that the real estate sector has now recovered. That's housing is a very big job creator. And as we were discussing just before about things like tourism, hospitality industry is a huge creator of jobs. So these health and education actually are very hugely labor-intensive, job-creating sectors. So a focus on jobs is, it's very sad that we have 20 crore missing jobs. I would just say that all actions, including government spending on infrastructure, which crowds in private investment, would really go a long way.
But recently, CA V. Anantha Nageshwaran has said that the private sector capex push is very vital, and that the government has sustained for as long as it has, but it is important that the private sector get in. What are your views on that?
You see, infrastructure is vital to achieve the goal of $5 trillion economy by 2025. And India's national infrastructure pipeline is one of the major exercises in this direction in order to provide physical and social infrastructure to its citizens by spending around 102 lakh crore under this scheme. As public expenditure on the infrastructural projects like energy, roads, urban and railways is very high, 71% of the total NIP expenditure, which would generate large employment opportunities and push aggregate demand in the economy due to its multiplier effect. However, in order to cater to this growing demand in the coming times, factory output should also increase correspondingly, where private investment and capex have large role to play. In light of their contribution to enhance output in the economy, there must be adequate focus to push private sector and to incentivize to play complementary role.
All right. But, there is another point to all of this. And, this is a debate that has actually now been pushed to the fore. And that is the concern about the significant compression of capital expenditure, especially in states. despite the fact they have that $1 trillion rupees interest-free loan, and that is leading to or sort of exacerbating the slowdown when it comes to growth. How do you see this playing out?
You see, as the economy witnessed global headwinds vis-a-vis Russia-Ukraine conflict and high inflation at domestic levels, such global uncertainties impacted the potential of the capital investments despite the rupees 1 trillion interest-free loan provision for it. Going ahead, as uncertainties are diminishing, Russia and Ukraine want to talk peace, and domestic inflation going down, the capital expenditure is expected to rejuvenate to its full swing. That is my personal expectation, that things should be definitely on track.
All right. Kavita, we were speaking about the rural economy. The rural economy right now, the total employment is about, 70%. It accounts for 70% of the employment. The unemployment rate, according to CMIE data, was upwards of 8% in October. And rural India, we know, is suffering from a sharp decline when it comes to real wages, a huge spike in inflation. There's unemployment, and all of this leads to inequality. What else can we expect? Because a lot of people have been pointing to the distress in the rural economy.
So, to my mind, it should be rural infrastructure spending that should increase, because this will lead to employment generation, and also it will lead to increase or boost consumption. So, in addition to your PM Kisan Yojana, which, does provide income support, and also Manrega, infrastructure spending there is the right way to go, according to me.
All right. Want to look back to the point that Mr. Gurcharan Das made about India becoming a manufacturing hub, a point that also Mr. Multani made about how if India wants to be a $5 trillion economy, then manufacturing, of course, needs to be something that we need to kind of look at. If China plus one is the strategy that a lot of global majors are looking at, from your vantage, are you actually seeing companies coming into India, and making India part of that China one strategy at all?
Maybe it's too early to give a definitive answer here, but reports do suggest that some major foreign companies have been shifting more of their manufacturing capabilities to India. And we definitely hold the potential to attract more foreign companies, given the advantage which we have in terms of low labor cost, which is also English speaking also, but we have to scale up significantly to, get to the levels that China has reached. We have policy, infrastructure, technology challenges, as well as inadequacy of funds, which, all these are constraints which have to be addressed. Now, more policy measures as well as government support is required for this. So I would say that we are sometime away to reach the level where, we are a long time away probably to reach the level where China has reached being a manufacturing major, but we do hold the potential for that.
All right. There were these PLI schemes, right, that the government sort of rolled out. Have you seen them have any impact when it comes, to the ground? Have they led to jobs in the sector?
Again, it's a little early for that, because the PLI scheme will start to show effect in the next couple of years. So it's a little too early to say that. But I would like to add that we need to expand the PLI scheme, include more labor-intensive sectors, and also as Mr. Gurcharan Das said, we probably need to tweak these schemes to incentivize employment creation. So that would, in case there are some backward linkages to the rural economy, that will also help in addressing the rural unemployment issue also to an extent.
Mr. Multani, I was interested to know, from your vantage, when it comes to ease of doing business, the government, has put in a lot of focus, a lot of thrust Ease of doing business is, I think, one of the big important issues as far as India goes. How do you think we've performed when it's come to that?
You see, the government is definitely moving in the right direction, but if we have to really capitalize on the opportunity which China is the mess which China has made of the world, then we need to do definitely things at a much bigger level. I think the basic thing we need to do is to decriminalize minor offenses to create private investment. People get scared that even on the drop of a hat, criminal cases are filed. The government is moving, but I think we need to do a lot more on that. Then apart from that, I strongly feel that, the government has taken out this wonderful policy that if you set up a new corporate today, a manufacturing unit, then the tax they will tax you at 15%. Whereas the old companies are paying 22%. I think all manufacturing companies should have a flat corporate rate of 15%. There should be no deductions because the foreign companies do not understand that you can take this rebate or that rebate or that rebate. They just understand 15% corporate tax is a very, very competitive rate. People will come in. And of course, one thing again, which is very, very important is the labor laws need to be definitely simplified, because if those labor laws are not flexible, then things become really difficult. The labor must be looked after, be adequately compensated, but they should not be so rigid that once they are hired, they can never, when your business goes down or something, there should be some sort of contract employment, which I think the center has passed, but the states are not implementing. So we need to definitely work on that if we have to capitalize on this golden opportunity which we have.
I want to focus on imports and exports. US and Europe are around 38% of India's exports. Both of these places will have perhaps negative GDP growth in 2023. What is the sort of impact do you think we should brace for?
Well, it is true that India's major export destinations like US and Europe are facing slowdown, which may affect India's high growth export to these nations. But India's exports are doing fairly well. That yes, whatever Indian industry doesn't want any subsidy or protection, but it wants a level playing field. Because today China is the biggest exporter of the world. Now, whatever is being given to the Chinese industry, give us, because when we have to reach out to the world, then we should be able to be competitive enough to match those rates. And if we do that, I strongly feel, forget USD 450 billion by March 2023, I think we can do phenomenal things. India has the capability, the potential. We need a level playing field. That's all I'll say.
So can you elaborate on that? When you talk of a level playing field?
You see, first and foremost, the land rates, when industry goes to set up their factories, the land rates are ridiculously high. Apart from that, electricity rates are high. Our logistic costs are high. The labor's productivity, thanks to the labor laws which are on, the productivity is comparatively not that much. So we need to work, and apart from that, the electricity rates are very high. I think we need to look into all these, that whatever is the sort of, the cost of production in a country like China, just match it. Don't give 1 rupee more or 1 rupee less, but match it. So that, when we go to the world, we are competitive enough, because India at least enjoys one thing. India enjoys good quality. Our reputation is of quality product. It is not that you buy a Chinese goods today, it will go bust tomorrow. So let us build on that and really be ambitious to take our industry forward, to take our exports forward. And most important is to generate employment, because that is the biggest issue.
If I may add a couple of points here, just to underline what has been said, that, in terms of labor laws, yes, they are a deterrent, and the center has not been able to pass them. So it's now up to the states. At least Mr. Modi, with his popularity, should get the BJP states in line on labor laws. Similarly, on land, the land law is now in the ball. It's again with the states. And the BJP states should pass that law. I mean, he's a popular guy. So these are two areas which are definitely make us uncompetitive. I would say it's very difficult to match sometimes the Chinese approach, because they are a dictatorial society and they can do things by fiat. However, there are other areas where we are uncompetitive. I mean, the ease of doing business there was a lot of push in a few years ago. We did improve our rankings on the ease of doing business, but it's the energy has gone out of that program. And we need to remember, that idea of states competing against each other on how better to have an ease of doing business. There's still too many reports coming of MSMEs constantly complaining about Inspector Raj and about corruption. That is not gone. The best, frankly, it's not the government, but the best thing that's happened to ease corruption is digitization. Now, that push to digitization has made it possible to get your approvals online, and we should support that wholeheartedly.
Yeah. But, speaking of MSMEs, Mr. Gurcharan Das, how do we revitalize that sector? I mean, that is a sector that has been crying for help and basically, speaking or has been asking for access to credit because there's a massive credit gap. They want to be globally competitive and are not being able to be so.
Yeah. Well, the best friend of MSMEs actually are the much maligned Amazons and Flipkarts of the world. And now, when you can reach your consumer, your customer with a click, it's amazing. And so we should, I think, actually, we should, instead of demonizing Amazon and so on, we should be very supportive that they are the best friends of MSMEs in one respect.
All right. Kavita and Mr. Pradeep Multani, I'd like to get your views on this. 99% of the MSMEs are small enterprises and they continue to remain small throughout their life cycle. How are we going to be able to, adding to what Mr. Gurcharan Das just said, being able to revitalize the segment, and what's the sort of push that you're expecting in this forthcoming budget?
If I may just say so, the biggest issues the MSMEs are facing, that is the payment which is due to them. We do have an MSME Act in which states that payment has to be done in a specific times of 30-45 days. But is that a ground reality? No. Even the CPSUs, the public sector undertakings, are not paying in the timely manner. And also the large companies, Indian companies, are not paying them on time. I would say timely payment is one of the most important things. And apart from that, I strongly feel we need to get our legal system into shape. Because here, if anyone issues you a check and you present it on a due date, it bounces. And then when you go to court to enforce it, it takes you years. Now, we definitely need something to be done on a judicial system also, that there is timely justice, so that within 6 months, 1 year, these sort of cases can take a right decision, so that at least the MSMEs can get the payments on time.
It is also affordable financing, or the dearth of affordable finance, which is also a constraint for them. Okay, and if that can be tackled or addressed, that would be of great help. In fact, during the pandemic, the ECLGS scheme was greatly beneficial. That is a case
in emergency line of credit.
Yes, credit line guarantee scheme. So such schemes would be greatly beneficial, and it can really help with the sector. My mind.
All right. Okay. Mr. Gurcharan Das, coming back to, our track on disinvestment. So we have some data in the nearly 9 months of the current financial year. The Indian government has not been able to meet even half of its 650 billion rupees budgeted investment target because of delays in privatizing some state-owned firms, which include BMEL and the Shipping Corporation of India. India had lowered its targets in 22-23. How do you see disinvestment shaping up in this budget?
Well, I wish I could be hopeful. Frankly, this lot has always missed their targets. In any other organization, certainly in the private sector, they would be sacked. And frankly, I really feel that the IAS officers should be banned from taking on this job. You need people who have much better knowledge of business to do this. There'll be a lot of people who would be in the private sector, who'd be willing to take on such jobs. I mean, in the government, you needed a bulldog like Shori with a whip to get this sort of job done. And, frankly, I mean, they're good people in the IAS. However, the system is so risk averse. I mean, they're always afraid of CVC, CAG, CBI. I can't, I had expected more. I frankly had said, now with the popularity that this government has, there would have people who can really deliver. And they haven't delivered. I'm sorry to say.
Dr. Multani, any take on this?
I do support what Gurcharan ji just said. You see, when we are, such competent people, the system is such that that we are not able to work to our potential. I think people like, countries like Israel, Germans, Indians, Japanese, I mean, I would say we are just intelligent people, but just let us work.
All right. Kavita, I want to speak on the Shree economy, and that is something that Mr. Gurcharan Das spoke on earlier. Our rate of, female participation in the labor force is abysmal at 24%. It's among the lowest in the world. Do you see this budget doing anything?
This is a rather complex issue, and there are a number of factors behind this low participation rate, ranging from social norms, lack of quality employment opportunities, lack of flexibility, employment benefits, even safety concerns, to just name a few. So some of these can be addressed through policy initiatives, but some of those, like the social norms, are difficult to tackle. And we have seen that the government has been making some progress here, or rather taking some measures here. In fact, there have been some encouraging changes which have been made in the labor laws in terms of equal opportunities for both genders, social security measures which have to be implemented, be it maternity leave and creche facility. So these are steps in the right direction. Okay, they have to make this, they have to work more on this.
On a wider perspective, do you think there is need of a policy, where the government just lays down and says, you need to have this many percent of women, in this segment or in that? Do you think a quota sort of would help?
I'm not in favor of a quota. Okay, it should be the right fit. Okay, because at the end of the day, it should be the correct resource for the job. Okay, but being a woman shouldn't be a hindrance for employing somebody, because very often they say that they will have certain social commitments or issues which they will need to.
They'll get married. They'll have kids. They'll drop out jobs. They'll take more breaks.
Yes, exactly. So that shouldn't be, or rather you should provide some flexibility, or, have some facilities which can cater to this.
Right. Kavita, I have one more question for you, and that is on, personal income tax. I mean, I think it's a question, to which everyone wants an answer. Do you see something sort of happening with that in the budget that will come out?
I don't see any tax breaks in the FY24 budget. Okay, there could be some increase in limits under Section 80C. Okay, probably it can be increased from 1.5 lakhs to 2.5 lakhs, but tax cuts I do not foresee.
All right. Okay, that was a very short and a very sharp answer. Which probably a lot of people are not going to be too happy to. But Mr. Gurcharan Das, focusing on some of the critical areas, and especially, this is the important bit, right? Like healthcare, education, skill development, creating a future-ready workforce, especially, from Bharat. How do you see the budget being able to tackle all of these things?
Well, the left is always wanted more education budget spending on education, more on healthcare, and all that. But if you analyze the situation, actually, it's not more money. Because, for example, half of India's children are in private schools now. 47% was the last figure, and it's probably crossed 50 by now. And why are they in private school? Why are they not in government school? Government school, they get free uniforms, free midday meal, free books. The government school and the teacher doesn't show up. The statistics show, and this is a very widely quoted statistic from that famous Harvard study, 1 out of 4 teachers is absent in a government school. And 1 out of 2 who's present is not teaching. So what does the poor parent do? The poor parent moves them into the private school. My point is, if you add the cost of what the private economy incurs on education and the government, you get a figure well over 6%. And frankly, the private economy does the same job much more efficiently with less. Now, the schools themselves are not so good. And what the government can help there is to reduce the license raj. To start a private school is heartbreaking. You need 17 permissions, and each one comes with a bribe. The worst one is the permission, what is called essentiality certificate. Oh, the school is essential. The bribe for that is the biggest bribe of all. In healthcare, our spending is low, and we should raise it. But I think, again, we should follow the model of Thailand. Thailand's 2002 20 baht reform has created universal healthcare, and the money is given to the individual and not to the hospital. And so the private and public hospitals compete for the money, and it's based on outcomes. So there are a lot of things we can learn from this. I would say that it's not the question of more money. It's ultimately comes down to good governance, good management.
All right. Mr. Multani, do you have an input on, how we can fix the governance bit of it?
Well, all I'll say is let the private sector breathe, let them perform, let them deliver. According to me, the healthcare sector and education can be money spinners for this, apart from providing healthcare to our population and education to our population. We can be the global hub for education as well as the hospitals of the world. Let's get the people from Africa or the Gulf coming to study in India. Like Gurcharan ji rightly said, 17 permissions leni hoti, 17 permissions. Come on, let them breathe.
All right, great. Thank you so very much, all of you, Kavita Chacko, Mr. Gurcharan Das, and Dr. Pradeep Multani, for joining us this evening and sharing your thoughts on the big budget before the general election, what India wants it should have been, what India needs. Thank you very much, and I wish you all a very good evening.